in case you haven't yet come to terms with it, this isn't actually a channel about hair loss. It's a channel about psychology disguised as a channel about hair loss. When you notice some of the most engaging things I talk about, it's actually about the psychology behind hair loss. And this video is the epitome of that. Yes, we're going to talk about hair loss, but psychology is really what this is coming down to. I'm helping you to address the fundamental issues in insecurities and your identity so that with or without hair, you're still the same person. That's my goal. I want to present to you a theory you've probably never heard of before. Let me start it out by this. Have you ever heard anyone say you can tell a lot about a man by what bothers him? Or you can tell a lot about a man by what he talks about, right? You can tell what's down in his heart based on those things, okay? Well, I want to explore that a little bit more. And I want, you know me, I've said before, there's two types of people in the world: those who allow themselves to become a victim, or those who choose to be victorious. This is kind of along those lines, but think of it this way. There's three types of people, and here they are: boring people, average people, and interesting people. Now, just a few days ago, I did a video on what makes a man cool. There were 11 of those items that we looked at from a scientific perspective. And I said, let's focus on these, not hair loss. You become a better, cooler person with or without hair. So think of it this way. There's three types of people by default: boring people, average people, and interesting people. Boring, average, interesting. And it just so happens that all three types of people by default talk about certain things that match where they are in the hierarchy. The hair loss hierarchy, to be exact. And here they are: people, events, and ideas. So to be specific, people who are boring talk about other people. People who are average talk about events. And people who are interesting talk about ideas. So let's explore that a little bit more. And I've already seen this show up on my channel in the comments, and that's how I want to close this video out, by talking about how that all adds up. So let's start out with this. If you're boring, people talk about other people. They're very distracted by what's going on and looking at the magazines and seeing, oh, what's on Facebook? Who did this? Oh, what's going on? And it's the epitome of when someone says, get a life. If you had your own life, you wouldn't be concerned with what other people are doing or thinking or believing, and how that compares with what you believe in, getting worried about it and let it emotionally affect you. Boring people worry about other people. Therefore, boring people talk about other people. There was an episode of The Office where, I forget the Indian girl, Mindy Kaling is her real name, but there was an episode where Jim hadn't seen her for a while, and he said, so what's new? What's going on? And she starts telling about all the movie stars, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. And then at the end, he's like, no, what's new with you? And she said, I just told you. Boring people who have no true sense of identity are really focused on other people. Boring people talk about it. Boring people talk about other people. Now, the next step up on the hierarchy: average people. Average people talk about events. Now, just this week, I finished the newest season of Portlandia, which is on Netflix, and the very last episode of the newest season, it starts off by having the small talk convention. And basically people go up to the podium in this hotel conference room and they give their best small talk, like, oh yeah, traffic's pretty bad out there today. And then everyone starts clapping. The weather is probably supposed to be getting better. And then everyone claps. It's this boring stuff. I can't stand small talk. When I hear people do that, I leave the room. No, small talk. You want to talk about the weather? You want to talk about traffic? Even politics. Boring. I don't care. It's so vanilla and mild. I don't care. I don't care about small talk. And that's why, unless it's something interesting, I just don't get involved in the conversations. Because average people talk about events. They're talking about what's going on, the things that they have no control over, the things that we're all controlled by. Average people talk about events. Now, lastly, Interesting people talk about ideas. That's what interesting people do. They talk about ideas. Because that involves challenge. That involves knowing who you are as a person. When you are confident in who you are, you're not worried about other people. You're not worried about the weather. But instead, what concerns you? You need that challenge. You need to find, hey, is there a new way of looking at life? Is there a new way of maybe seeing the world? If everyone else sees this, can I see this instead? That's what interesting people do. Now, obviously, that's why you're watching my video today, because I am explaining new ideas to you. Now, let's bring this back to hair loss. I said that even in the comment section that we can see how this plays out. We've got some people, the people who are very insecure in themselves with their hair loss, the people who are walking down the hair loss path of fear. What are they doing? They'll say, this channel's awful. You don't know anything about hair loss. This is a stupid channel. Okay? Because they're boring people. So they are going to attack other people. That's their mentality. They're insecure. They don't have their identity. Then there's average people. They're gonna show up and they're gonna talk about, you know, here's the options for hair loss. But then the most interesting and most secure people you're gonna find on this channel are gonna be the ones who are overcoming their hair loss and they're able to grasp that idea. They're not stuck down with the average people who are still talking about events or other people and getting distracted by all that, but instead they're moving forward. And you know, hey, by all means, if you need to get a hair transplant, if you need to do those things, by all means do them. It's a step closer to you finding your identity as someone who's losing their hair. And it's that idea that you can overcome it instead of just freaking out about it. So I definitely see this in there, and I know this is a challenging thing to hear. But what I want to encourage you to do is to become an interesting person. Because with or without hair, if you're not an interesting person, you're either average talking about the weather or sports. Come on. I did a whole video about how lame sports are. I mean, okay, so you think talking about the weather is lame? You think talking about traffic is lame? You want to talk about politics and how boring and that? But then sports? Ah, come on. How boring is that? You don't have anything else better to talk about than sports? That's boring. Get interesting, get ideas, start talking about ideas. That's what interesting people do. You're losing your hair? Oh, well, no one's going to like me because I'm losing my hair. You know what? Get interesting. Get a life. We don't worry about other people anymore. Other people's problems. We don't care about that. You want weather, sports? That's small talk. We don't do that. We're interesting people. I'm an interesting person. That's why you're listening to me 25 minutes a day. That's why subscribership contends. It's going up every day. Subscribership. Just last week I hit 2,000, now I'm 2,100. Because this is ideas. This is ideas. And as I am interesting, I want you to be interesting. It's very important that you understand there's 3 types of people in the world. Boring, average, and interesting. Boring people talk about other people. Average people talk about events. And interesting people talk about ideas. So surround yourself, connect with people who have ideas and are willing to see things differently. Otherwise, you become boring and average. And especially if you're dealing with hair loss, one of the best things you can do is to be an interesting and engaging person. Because people aren't going to care about hair if you're interesting. And in closing thought, even though I wasn't balding at all when I met my wife nearly 11 years ago, remember this story. She didn't fall for me because of my looks. She fell for me because I was an interesting person. And she told me a couple weeks after we started dating, she said, I knew you were special because I knew no matter what's happening in our lives, we'd always have something interesting to talk about because you always have something interesting to say. Why? Because interesting people have ideas. And they press the button to finish the video.